Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Paoli, editor at Redmond Mag, and I am pleased to be moderating our first session, as well as welcoming you to our Enterprise Backup and Recovery 101 Summit, brought to you by Commvault, Cohesity, Simian Cloud, Zerto, Lacework, and Zoho. The editorial staff of Virtualization and Cloud Review have worked hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic, so we really hope you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with these three great sessions, we do have some announcements. First, we wanted to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, so please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A area of your console as they come up so we can get them answered for you by our experts. During today's third session, we will be giving away a Nintendo Switch, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsors Commvault, Cohesity, Simian Cloud, Zerto, Lacework, and Zoho available on our consoles right now, so please download and check those out. It's because of our sponsors underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit, so we thank them for sponsoring and supporting the community and ask you to check out these resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, Top 7 Backup and Recovery Challenges and How to Overcome Them. This session features Greg Schultz. Greg Schultz is a founder and senior advisor at Server Storage IO, an independent IT advisory, consultancy, and creative services firm. As a Microsoft MVP in Cloud Data Center Management and a 10-time VMware vExpert, he brings a diverse background to his work as a consulting analyst with a real-world perspective across applications, data infrastructures, hardware, software, and cloud. He's also the author of several books. Take it away, Greg.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Hello and welcome everybody to today's Enterprise Backup and Recovery 101 Summit and our first discussion, Top 7 Backup and Recovery Challenges and How to Overcome Them. I'm Greg Schultz of Server Storage IO, and let's get started. So here's what we're going to cover here in the next several minutes, we'll put it that way. The top 7 backup and recovery challenges, and these will include the threat risk, i.e. the need for backup and recovery, growth, more apps, more data, dependencies, time. How can you do more faster? Staffing, the experience, the availability of staff, cost, stretching budgets to go further, management, insights, and recovery confidence. How confident are you that you can actually recover, restore, resume, rebuild, things that start with R, along with some best practices, tips, and Q&A discussion. So a reminder, submit your questions, and we'll get to those as we work our way through this. Okay, let's just jump right into it here. And when we talk about our number one challenge, it has to be the threat risk. Now, at the top of the threat risk, if you think about it, the tip of the iceberg, ransomware. That's the big marquee, that's the headline news grabber, and it's a big real threat. However, as I mentioned, it's the tip of the iceberg. That's the part that we see, we hear about. There are all kinds of other threats that can and do and will happen, okay? And the other thing about these other threats is not to diminish ransomware. That's key. We're not diminishing or downplaying ransomware. We're just also saying, in addition, we need to keep aware of all these other things that can and do happen. And these are emerging, these are existing, they're traditional threats. And the key thing here is everything is not the same. Everything is not the same in terms of there are different threat risks that have different relevant impacts across your organization, across your business at different layers. There are those that are full destruction, whether it be logical or physical damage. Some are partial damage. Some things are impacted. There are some that result in data loss, corruption, whether it be at the app layer, the data, the infrastructure. There's loss of access, a denial of service attack, or something happening with your network or part of that infrastructure, whether it's on-prem, at the cloud, or out at the edge. And then there's also information leaked, data compromised, data corrupted. So as we look at this on the left, Those are some of the different things that can happen: viruses, damage, malware, destruction, ransomware, theft, that again can either be full or partial. There's the accidental as well as intentional, acts of nature, acts of man, full or partial loss. There are the external as well as internal that could be accidental or intentional, but there are also technology failure, hardware failure, software failure, network failure, configuration, errors, and omissions. So all these things are part of the different threat risks. Some are known, some are older, some are legacy, some are new and emerging, but they're all there with their different relative impact. And key is looking at over there on that right is different layers of the stack, different elevations, altitudes, if you want to think of it that way, from higher level to lower level. And across the bottom are the different locations, whether it's in the public cloud, whether it's your on-prem, the hybrid, to the edge, all points in between. So let's build out on this a little bit more. And as we look at this here, it's similar to what we just saw, but highlighting the fact that there are these different elevations, there are these different layers, these different altitudes that we need to think about up and down that stack where different things can happen. Again, everything is not the same. There's these different focus areas, but there's that Appleware, that transaction consistency, fault isolation, healing, recovery, that there's different layers and different focus areas and different tools, technologies, techniques for protecting. So, for example, down in the bottom, you could say we're just going to holistically snapshot an entire volume or a virtual disk, VMDK or a VHDX, whatever it happens to be. We're just going to protect at a coarse macro level. On the other hand, you could go way up to the top of that application, say, you know what, we're going to do application protection with application-based snapshot, transaction logging, journaling, different things like that, or different points in between. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It doesn't have to be we're only going to do it at the app, we're only going to do it down at the lower infrastructure. You can do it at different points in between. And that's part of what we're going to talk through as we go through is part of that rethinking. How you protect, where you protect, what are you protecting it against? All right, so as we move on, a couple key things here. Again, there are these different threat risks, but there are also different relevance to your organization as well as what their impact is going to be. And this is where something as simple as this notion of a business impact analysis comes into play. In other words, assess the threat risks to your organization and their relative impact to the different parts of you. So one, is there a threat risk? Does it or can it or will it impact your organization? And if it does, how does it impact your organization as a whole, but also different parts of your organization? So that means knowing and understanding your business, looking beyond the IT and the tech, getting different players involved across the organization, up and down that stack, but also horizontally across different areas, such that you've got input, you've got involvement, you've got buy-in from not only different aspects of the IT, of the apps owners, but also from the business, finance, other layers of management. And the key one here is, what does the business need versus want? They sound the same, but they are really, really different. And if there is like a key concept to being able to optimize backup, data protection, recovery, business resilience, things like that, is really getting to know and understand needs versus want. If I ask somebody, what do you want for data protection? What do you want for recovery time? They're going to give me their wish list. But if I say, okay, now, what do you need? Well, they're going to tell me the same thing, okay? Now, if I say, well, here's the difference. Need is what you will get funding for, what you are willing to pay for. Want is what you're going to get based on, somebody else is going to pay for it for you, okay? That key notion is understanding need versus want, and from the business is how you get buy-in. Now, some will say, well, geez, we need zero downtime, instant recovery, all these great things. Okay, great. That's what you want. And then when it comes down to it and say, what do you need? Because there's a cost to it. All of a sudden, been in these conversations where it goes a completely different way. Well, we really don't need instant. We really can tolerate some disruption, especially if it saves us money. Okay, now you got to be ready for a quick balancing act. One is, but being able to add that value of saying, look, if you invest money, but you are going to impact the business, but if you invest and pay and optimize a little bit way, you can actually boost your productivity. So in other words, you got to get this discussion involving the business and not just from a cost cutting. We want to find and remove complexity so we can remove cost, but to enable the business, not to cripple it, not to inhibit it. So this is why we need to understand that need versus want, and that can really cut through a lot of different issues, a lot of different ways things are being done. And again, that's analyzing the threat risks and the relative impacts and across the different business segments, which is why you want to get different parts of the business and their fingerprints on whatever it is decisions that you're making. All right, let's move on here. So we've talked about one of the biggies, i.e. the threat risks. This is one that, this next one is just huge, okay? Sorry, I got to say, it's big. It's growth, okay? So as we look at growth, what this is looking at is we know there are more dependencies on workers, users, clients, consumers, viewers of the apps, of the data, of the information, working from home, mobile, remote, in the office. Okay, we know that's a growth area. We also know that there's growth across different workloads. AI getting a lot of headlines, a lot of activity, a lot of interest, because there's a lot of different aspects of AI. It's not just about ChatGPT and generative. There's a lot of other aspects to it, but there's analytics, media entertainment, traditional tier 1 and tier 2 apps, virtual desktops, M365, modeling, forecasting, simulation, logistics, call centers, unified communications, security. The list goes on and on. And not only is there more of these different types of apps, but those apps are getting bigger. And that brings us down to that bottom layer, which is the cloud and on-prem apps and data are growing in terms of the number of them, the sizes of them, the volume, the amount of data, the velocity, the speed at which things are being created, all compounding, needing more resources, compute, network storage, software licenses to be able to manage, to secure, and to protect. So this is where one of the big challenges comes into play with backup and recovery is how do you support the dependencies so that you can have faster recovery, better resilience, high availability, and supporting these new and different workloads in different places, and just simply not throw more hardware, not throw more software licenses, not throw more subscriptions, because all those costs are adding up. We shifted from a CapEx spending problem. Now, all of a sudden, we're realizing, hey, those dollars just shifted from one column of the balance sheet to the other. Now we have OpEx considerations, OpEx concerns that are going on. This next slide here, to show you real quickly, is just to emphasize that when we hear growth, yeah, there's more data, there's big data, there's little data, but this is in a multi-dimension. Yes, there are more of whatever. We're seeing more of different files, objects, containers, apps, types of data, but they're also occurring at a faster rate. They are bigger. There are more of them. There's that aspect of growth. So it's not a one or two dimensional challenge. It's a multi-dimensional that we have to keep in mind: the size, the number, that volume, the velocity, and the different types that are going on. And again, everything is not the same, and all threat risks aren't the same, nor their impact. Are you treating everything the same? Okay, let's jump into time. As we look at time, how can you do more faster? Well, this gets to be a little bit trickier. And with time, on the one hand, we can't really create more time, okay? That's one of those finite resources. However, we can make better use of that time. We can, if you think of it as a concept, slow things down without slowing down the wall clock. In other words, if we could somehow slow things down so that you're seeing things and you're able to work on them in a way without slowing down the apps, without slowing down the users, without having to slow the wall clock down, but to be able to virtually get more done where it seems like you're slowing things down, but in fact, you're speeding things up. The backups, the data protection. When I say backup, let me clarify something here. When I say backup, it's not just traditional backup restore, where it be disk to tape, disk to solid state, disk to NVMe, disk to cloud, disk to whatever. When I say backup data protection, I'm using that to refer to some sort of protection mechanism that is done at a particular point in time. So in other words, that could be a classic backup, whether it be an incremental, a full, a differential, a synthetic, whatever your favorite technique is. But it could also be a snapshot. It could be a point-in-time copy. It could be a consistency point. It could be a checkpoint. In other words, it's something that's happening at a particular point in time that you can go back to and then to be able to recover forward. All right, so with that in mind, how do we address time? Well, one, we got to step back and look at the bigger picture, which is we've got all these different tools, technologies, and techniques. And a common one is just let's simply throw more at it, more hardware, faster servers, faster storage, more in different types of storage, lower cost storage. Let's move everything to the cloud. But then we need faster networks, and then we need to spend on cloud spend. We can do things like shifting from regular traditional backups to snapshot point-in-time copies, which should be lighter, quicker, less obtrusive. But what about if we need to maintain application consistency? Well, that's where we need to have application integration as a part of whatever that protection is, whether it be the backup, a snapshot, point-in-time, copy, journal, checkpoint. So we've got all these different options. And we still need to invest. Yes, we still need to have more storage. We need to have more servers compute to run the software, to do all this, to do the discovery, to do the analytics. We need the networks. We need the cloud. But where are we going to recover to? How are we going to recover? What are the different capabilities? So what this all comes down to is that we've got all these different tools, techniques, and technologies. How can we use them more effectively? How can we start to do more in a given amount of time, whether it's do more protection or be able to recover faster? In order to recover faster, do we need to restore an entire system, an entire volume, an entire file system, an entire file object, or an entire database? Can we go more granular and bring back an individual file or configuration setting or a table or an email? Do we have that granularity to be able to do that really flexible, fast type recovery, and to be able to do that recovery back to different locations and to different mediums? These are all part of that equation. And how do we go about that is we start to rethink data protection, including backup and recovery. We start to rethink how we're doing it. And that's that step back to what we talked about a little bit ago about that impact analysis, that we have to look at it and step back from the technology for a moment and think about, okay, from the business, are we treating everything the same? Are we doing things the same because that's how we've always done it? Or we're tied to this particular technology for whatever reason, okay? But to start to rethink, building upon built-in cloud technologies. There's the perception that, well, we'll just move everything to the cloud, and once it's on the cloud, we don't have to worry about data protection, backup, recovery anymore because the clouds have backup, the clouds have resiliency, they've got good durability, they've got snapshots underlying. Yeah, they do. But how are you leveraging those? How are you using different options, and for what granularity? Okay, are you back to that, hey, I can rely on the cloud, but it's based on a snapshot every 8 hours or every 24 hours, but yet you need that finer grained recovery capability at different locations in your application stack. So that's part of that rethinking. So just simply going to the cloud does not eliminate your need for data protection. You still need and you should look at how you can supplement that and how you can enhance on that. There's this idea of cutting costs. Well, when you cut costs, you compromise. You can cause problems elsewhere. So how do you support that growth? It's enabling more versions so that you have more time intervals and copies of those, such that you've got all your copies and you can go back 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever, but you only find out that, 9 months back, they're all infected, they're all damaged, or they weren't working. So this is tying into, we've got to do more, but we've also have to do it in less time. And part of that is rethinking from just using things the way they've always been done, reusing technology in new and different ways. So real quickly here, let's look at granularity, okay? So as I mentioned before, from a granular standpoint, we can look at it and say, well, we're going to protect everything down at the storage, at the server layer. We'll do a storage level snapshot, a storage level backup recovery. We'll do the snapshot at the virtual machine layer. Okay, great. Checkbox, we've got it taken care of. Granted, those are doing more heavy lifting because there's more things to be done at those layers. As we go up the stack, as we go up higher in elevation, things are changing, but not at the same degree that we might be changing at a lower level because it's more compounded. But the notion is here that you've got that ability that you could protect down at the storage, at the OS, at the virtual machine, but you could come up to the database and leverage database logging, database consistency point, checkpoints, database replication. Some applications also have similar capabilities. So you can leverage different tools that are in your toolbox at those different layers, or configure things such that the database administrators or the users have that ability to define what they need and how they want it protected, that can also facilitate their rapid recovery. Look, if you got a DBA coming to you and say, I need my database restored. Okay, first question is, well, what if we could just bring back an individual table? Would that work? They might look at you and say, well, I only need an individual table, but I always was taught, I always learned, it's always been my experience, we need to bring the entire database back because that's all you have. Those are interesting discussions to get into that can help you rethink, re-architect how you're protecting, but also to enable that recovery, okay? So that fine-grained protection is what's enabling that fine-grained recovery. You could turn it the other way. We need fine-grained, fast, flexible recovery, and at different layers. So maybe up at an application layer, we need an application-aware snapshot from that context, maybe every 15 minutes, while a different application might be hourly. And then there might be some others, or a file system that might be every 8 hours. Maybe the system's 24 hours. And again, don't use this as this is what you have to do. No, use this just as a thought, as a example to get your thinking, get your discussion around, is that you don't have to treat everything the same, that you can treat at different granularities where things are changing faster, but that if you go down that stack, when you go to capture at a bigger granularity or less granular, you're capturing more, okay? That's the key thing, is how you start to balance it. Now, this should prompt the question is, well, geez, isn't that going to increase the number of copies we have, the size of those copies, the number of versions? And the answer is absolutely yes, unless, bold, underline, unless you do a couple of other steps, which is reducing the data footprint impact, which we're going to touch on. All right, so let's move forward on to this. Okay, we'll get more on the data footprint here in just a moment. So here's the thing, step back. What are you designing and optimizing your data protection for? Is it specific threat risk, i.e. ransomware, or other viruses, or technology failures and faults? Is it to reduce the speed of recovery so that you can recover faster, whether it be a full recovery or partial recovery? Are you designing around specific technology, whether it be hardware, software, functionality, as opposed to what the business needs, what the business requires? So there's different attributes to consider. And again, everything is not the same. Are you treating everything the same? However, balancing it where you have so many different scenarios, that's adding complexity versus treating everything. That's a balancing act. And that's where you just have to apply your insight into your own organization as to what you can do and what can be done. Okay? So again, how to speed up data protection? Well, we could certainly throw more hardware, more software, more network, more people, more services and subscriptions. You could reduce the number of backups, i.e. the frequencies, those intervals, along with retention copies, but that might cut into your ability to recover, okay? This, again, ties back to rethinking. You want more flexibility. You would like to have more copies, more versions and copies without cutting into that. But then we've got to cut our costs. This is where data footprint reduction, which is reducing the impact of that expanding data footprint. And your data footprint is the footprint of the data, the availability or the mirrored copies or the replicas, as well as point-in-time copies, snapshots, backups, and the copies of those, so those different intervals and versions. And this is also balancing that coarse, fast, bulk recovery versus fine-grained selective, having that best of both worlds. As you recall a little bit ago, we talked about, in terms of growth, it's not a one or two dimensional XY type challenge or problem or issue or opportunity. Same thing is when we're looking at how we protect, how we want to recover, it is a multidimensional, is that we need that fast, flexible recovery, but we also need to be able to do things quicker, okay? So again, avoid treating everything the same, but also start using new things as well as old things in new ways. And what that is meant by is if all of a sudden you've swapped tape out for disk, maybe you've swapped disk out for solid state. So now you're backing up, instead of from disk to tape, you're going disk to disk or disk to solid state or disk to cloud. Okay, if all you've done is swapped out the medium or the media or the device or that location where you're sending your data to, okay, yeah, you've upgraded the technology, you're using the new technology. However, you're using those destinations in new ways. Have you thought about that instead of just trying to stream more data, a full backup, a full copy during a particular interval, or a big giant incremental on a macro basis, have you rethought about using the technology, the hardware, but also the software in new and different ways, rethinking that thought process, getting away from, well, we've always done it that way. That's what our users expect. That's what they want. No, have that conversation with them, and they might say, well, yeah, that's what we want because that's what you've been able to provide us. What we need or would like would be something different. Have those conversations. They can be really, really enlightening. Okay, so something else going on here now. So we've talked about the threat risk, the growth, time. Let's talk about staffing. So what are you going to do with staffing? The challenges are real straightforward. The availability of skilled, experienced workers. Let's face it, if you're somebody new coming into the industry or even you've been around, what's more interesting is I'm going to do backup and recovery or data protection, resilience, or working something a little bit more interesting. I want to go work on AI. I want to go work on Kubernetes and containers. I want to go cloud, yeah. So how do you attract people to want to come and do it? Well, especially with budget constraints, is having that ability to train and retain staff, changing that perception that management would have that, hey, cloud reduces staffing needs, let's continue to find ways to cut costs versus removing costs, removing complexity. There's also the perception that's growing that AI is or will be the silver bullet, the big red easy button. So we don't need to invest. But the key thing there is that management, the organization, needs to invest in data protection and recovery as they would other parts of the business. It's a business enabler. And that's one of the key breakthroughs that management needs to see, is that it's a business enabler, not a cost center. And that takes time to work through. One of the ways you work through that is get them involved in those needs versus want discussions, those business impact assessments and analysis. And says, you know what, we can cut cost over in this area. Then when something happens and that area is impacted, management comes down and say, AIT, why did you cut that? We didn't. Go talk to your finance people. They're the ones who cut it. Next thing you know, those finance people are going to come over and say, you know, thanks for throwing us under the bus. How do we not make this happen again? Get them involved. Okay, so what are some solutions to staffing? Find ways to gain, train, retain, and staff for data protection, that it's not a bottom of the stack. That, look, if you want to play with containers, you want to play with virtual machines, you want to play with new and different technology, do some really interesting things, those all apply and should apply and can apply to data protection. It doesn't have to be boring. It should be really exciting. There's a lot of interesting opportunities. Setting up sandboxes, test areas where people can come in and set up and test. If you're having interns, get them involved where they can start experimenting and working with and trying and finding out what works, what doesn't work, how to leverage new tools and new ways. But find those ways to gain, train, and retain staff. Establish career paths, so that include exposure to adjacent areas such as AI, such as containers, different parts of the organization. And encourage tradecraft, experience, skills development. I put a logo of a couple of my books there because they contain several chapters on these particular topics: data protection, footprint reduction, resiliency, different things like that. Yeah, sure, it's a cheap plug, but the information is there. Leverage it. But again, convince the management of that value, and then leverage new and existing smart technologies, wizards, to help boost user productivity for protection and recovery. All right, moving along here. Cost. All right, cost is usually a big one. It turns out we've been talking already how to address cost. You just haven't had the big giant flags waving saying this is a cost item. No, we've been talking about cost, but let's net it out here. All right, so as we look at cost, okay, here's something that you might look at and say, hey, this looks familiar. Life cycles, tiering, moving things around. You know, this, yeah, I know all this. This is like, you know, old stuff. Great, why aren't you doing it? Well, we already are. Great, can you enhance it? The basic gist is this. It's really, really simple. You've got a pool of data out there, okay? There is what you know, and of different types: structured, unstructured, legacy, emerging, block files, objects. Okay, you've got a pool of data. You've got a data lake, an ocean of data, a sea of data, however you want to put it, okay? But you've got data that you know the value. It's high value, it's low value, very high value, it's high performance, low performance, but that there's value, okay? Great. The trick there is just aligning it to the right technology. Maybe it means boosting it onto faster technology, faster storage, so that it can be accessed and used quicker, okay? Then there is the area of unknown, which is there's a lot of it. We really don't know today if it's high value or low value, how long we need to keep it around, but we suspect we need to keep it around for a while till we figure out. And what we've seen over the last several years is that organizations have started and increased the amount of data that they've kept under the notion that we think we can unlock value sometime in the future as the tools become available. Guess what? That future is today. We're seeing the data being unlocked with different analytics, with different tools, and being leveraged. Okay, so here's the thing, is that if you know the value, leverage it, protect it accordingly. Likewise, if you know you've got data that you don't know the value, but all of a sudden you determine that, hey, it is important, great. Promote it in terms of how you're going to protect it, how you're going to serve it up, how you're going to store it. Likewise, as you see data that evolves from, well, it really isn't all that important anymore, but we still need to do something with it. We need to keep it around. Great, demote it. And when I say demote it, move it into different types of storage, fast, highly available, or demote it into lower cost, cooler storage, maybe even a cold archive. But then as data has no value, well, there is that data you could just delete, but there's other data that, you know what, let's just keep a copy just in case. Great, make that copy and put it into cold archived storage that you don't have to protect. It's being taken care of for you. What all this is doing in a nutshell, this basic concept, is rethinking how you're doing things, cut down on the amount of moving back and forth, how you're protecting. If you've got data that's not changing, how you go about protecting it should change as well. But it really comes down to leveraging your resources, being able to keep more, protect more, but also adjust your cost accordingly. This is not cost cutting. This is removing costs because you might be paying for things that you really need to be doing the way you're doing it. Okay, so I mentioned data footprint reduction. We'll go through this real quick here. This is from expanding beyond storage effective or efficiency to storage effectiveness and productivity. It's not just about dedupe ratios, but also about rates and performance. But it's also life beyond dedupe. It's using different technologies, different techniques across different workloads at different altitudes layers, and it's enabling you to do more data protection with different versions and intervals, as well as copies, so that you have more capabilities for recovering, but doing it in such a way that you're not just simply growing the amount of storage, you're not growing your footprint, you're optimizing it. So there are a lot of different categories or technologies and techniques and tools that are part of the data footprint reduction toolbox. These include archiving, life beyond compliance. Archiving is not exclusive to compliance. You could be using it as a silver bullet, an aspirin to solve so many data management issues and challenges. There's that assessment, that insight, that reporting, rethinking how and what you're protecting. There's that backup modernization, which is rethinking how you're protecting versus simply using new tools in old ways. There's cleanup, compression, compaction, consolidation. There's data deletion, data management, of course, dedupe. There's that network bandwidth optimization over the LANs and WANs, space-saving snapshots, storage tiering, thin provisioning, among many, many others. This is a lot of area here that we boiled down to one slide, but what it basically does is allow you to have data growth with better protection with lower overhead. Okay, so cost. We've addressed that. Management. What are we going to do about management? And I'm not talking about upper management per se. This is managing what you have, how you're taking care of things. One of the big ones here is gaps. There are data protection gaps, the good, the bad, the ugly. And what do I mean by this? Okay, good gaps are things like air gaps, where you have protection intervals that you can go back and recover to a point in time. Those are air gaps, they are time gaps, excuse me. Air gaps are where you've actually isolated your protection copies, maybe on a different system, maybe in a different location, maybe to the cloud. They're immutable, but you've got those different isolations so that when an attacker does attack your backup, your recovery system, and all the associated components, you've got protection. Bad gaps is a missed interval, a missed recovery point, where the data is not being protected, that the data is inconsistent. In other words, you think the backups are great, they look like they're working, that maybe you even did a quick rapid restore and say, yep, we were able to bring the backup back, but you didn't have anybody actually open the backup and try to use the files or try to use the databases or the tables, things like that. That bad gap is something was missed. The ugly, that again builds on what I just mentioned, but it's even worse, is what you thought was recoverable isn't. There's missing copies, there's corruption, there's damage, What you thought was copied actually wasn't included for whatever reason. Maybe it's an error and omission, a configuration. Maybe that your backups were infected, they were attacked, lack of testing, okay? So these are different types of gaps. Something else is we've talked about a lot of different things and shifting, using things in new and different ways. And one of those is changing the paradigm. And I'm just going to jump here, which is in the past, a 3-2-1. Different systems on different location. Let's expand that where we add another component, okay? In other words, there's not only copies, but there's an awareness and a focus about versions, okay? That we have more versions, but you also have copies of those versions. We have copies, but we have different versions. That we differentiate, separate, and isolate those out. A lot of times they get lumped together, okay? But it's highlighting that importance. But that they're also in different systems or devices or locations, and that one of them is off-site, whether it be in the cloud or offline, physically powered down somewhere, and put that air gap in between. And the whole idea is that it's about addressing availability plus access plus durability plus security, and to give you more protection when something happens. And that means this is a way of protecting your backup recovery, your data protection infrastructure. So some additional tips here: have that situational awareness, gaining confidence in the ability for a fast and flexible restoration, leveraging automation intelligence tools, and securing and protecting your backup, your data protection environment. A couple more here, and let's just run through some best practices real quick. Don't be scared, be prepared. Assess and review your environment from technology to policies and people training. Use new and old things in new ways. Watch out for treating everything the same. Have that granularity, but in the course of giving more flexibility, be careful that you're not increasing your cost, but that you're also applying that rethinking, the different tools, technology that allows you to have more granularity and protection. And again, test and protect your data protection, your security, your logs, your certs, your keys. Again, leverage that different tools, technologies, improve their policies, educate, train, and test. And again, can you restore applications, data, certificates, getting that involvement for others? Here's a really key thing is in the course of testing, don't cause a disaster because you've restored something and then accidentally overwrite it. All right, we're going to wrap up, and then we're going to move into some Q&A. I see we've got some queued up already. So again, in summary, have confidence in your recovery capabilities, which you get by testing them. Reduce your footprint. We've got to support growth. You got to do more. You got to be able to do it in less time. That is going in there and rethinking how you're protecting, what you're protecting, when you're protecting, and using different tools and techniques to reduce your footprint impact, but also to speed things up. Watch out for cost cutting versus removing complexity, which helps to remove cost. There's some information there, my blog, where my books are, and again, I've got chapters on all these things that we've talked on here. And the key there is have visibility. Without visibility, you're flying blind, particularly in the clouds. All right, with that, hey, Chris, do we have some time for questions?
We do have some time for questions, and we have a few good ones already. And remember, if you want to get your burning question answered by Greg, we do have about 10 minutes here. Let's kick it off with a question from Venkata. What is your best recommendation to have a disk snapshot retention time?
That's good based on what your business needs, what your business requirements are. Certainly, I would have it in such a way that you have more retention for say going back like days, certain number, but then as you go out further back in time, you maybe have fewer, but you still want to have those. So that means is that you want to have that ability to go back at least a year, but maybe not for everything. This goes back to that business impact assessment, that analysis that are you going to treat everything the same, that everything has that same policy, or can you do it in such a way where certain high-risk certain high value, high benefit applications need different recovery, need different retention than others. If you've got applications, workloads that they really don't change a whole lot, okay, but they have value, that you are going to rethink it. So rather than just saying it should be this number of weekly, this number of monthly, this number of yearly, is rethink what is applicable to your environment. Do that work of assessing your whole organization or being able to break it down into different components.
All right, great. This next question is probably on all our minds right now. How does AI and copilots help to address backup and recovery?
Great question. We're seeing different vendors coming out with their AI-ified technologies. And some of these could be as simple as rebranding their existing management, search, predictive tools, and saying they're now AI-powered. Okay, good. Some tools, for example, you sit like with a Copilot, and it's like, hey, Copilot, do my backups for me. Well, is the Copilot going to do your backup for you, or just tell you this is what you should be doing as best practices? Okay, right off the bat, where there can be some value with some of these technology tools is enhancing with search, being able to find things a little easier, a little quicker. Another is coverage. Okay, can the tools, can the wizards, can the advisors, can they go out there and actually look at and say, yes, not only should you be doing this, this, and this, but yeah, you are doing this, and oh, by the way, you have some vulnerabilities in this area, and these vulnerabilities are high, medium, low. That's where there can be some real value in these tools, helping you to find where those gaps in coverage are, where those vulnerabilities are, where you're exposed. But also keep in mind, AI is being used to attack your systems by the bad actors.
Okay, Ron wants to know, is backing up the individual VMs versus the entire VM system a better way to manage your storage limitations for on-prem storage?
You know, that comes back to what's your priority. If you need, in the size of that environment, what's the granularity that you need for recovery? That just comes back to what's applicable for what your particular needs are. You could probably get some people to say, yeah, backing up the individual VMs is more important, or backing up the entire. It could very well be a combination, a hybrid, where you're doing at a very coarse level, where you've protected the entire system, but then at a different interval, certain VMs are being protected at a different interval. And then within those VMs, you may be doing system level, OS level, database, application, or some other granularity of protection, because what that VM is hosting is very, very important. So that's where you have to look at those different capabilities and requirements.
Okay, great. All right, Greg, one of our attendees is calling you out. How come you didn't mention encryption?
Good question. Time. Look, encryption is important. Encryption at rest, encryption in flight, encryption within the virtual machine, protected virtual machines, encrypted memory, confidential compute. We could do a whole nother webinar on that. So I'm glad that they brought that up.
Okay. Why are backups needed if we already moved our apps and workloads to the cloud?
Great question. It could very well be that you've got a checkbox, mission accomplished, high fives around the table, but then it should be, yeah, but wait a minute. I need to be able to recover on a more granular basis. What's the granularity of that cloud-based coursed snapshot or protection? That's what it comes back to, is what's that recovery? What's that flexibility that you need? Do you need that additional granularity?
Okay, great. William wants to know, when assessing the value of backup and recovery, do you see enterprise management placing a consequential damage value, such as if customer service can't answer customer inquiries, We will lose X number of customers per day or unable to take orders is worth Y per day. Any experience or rule of thumb here?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for bringing it up because it ties directly back to what I was talking about is that rethinking, that assessment, getting the business involved, getting their fingerprints on it. The organization, the business, the management, they should be looking at keeping the business running, keeping it going successful versus just simply are they making their quarter-to-quarter numbers. And this is why you get them involved. The organizations should be looking at data protection as an investment, as a business enabler, because we didn't even get into the area of how you can leverage your protection copies for enabling new analytics and other things. In other words, instead of seeing it as a cost, here's a way that we can leverage those capabilities for doing more new and additional things. So they should be looking at that. Unfortunately, just like they should be looking at how do they insure. One of the challenges that some organizations do is that they'll look at it and say, well, let's see here. What's the risk of this happening? Okay. So they're going to do their actuarial or other analytics, say, well, the probability of something happening, the cost is going to be this. Okay. Well, what's the cost of having an insurance policy that covers that versus actually doing it? Well, it could very well be that the insurance will pay out, but that insurance policy might actually say that the organization needs to have some minimum amount of protection that addresses certain things. And that's that tie-in, that's that hook. Again, getting the business, getting the management, getting the different entities involved and their fingerprints on this.
Okay, let's get a couple more questions in here before our session break. What's the difference between dedupe and DFR?
Data footprint reduction, DFR, data footprint reduction, is the umbrella. It's the big giant bucket that encompasses different tools, different technologies, and techniques. Dedupe is just a technology, an approach that fits under the big, broader DFR, data footprint reduction. And the dedupe, that could be at the system level, it could be at the storage level, it could be at the file system level, the operating system level. So it can be in different places. But the companion to that would be traditional compression. Some data dedupes well, others don't. Most data will compress, but you've got these different tools. So it doesn't have to be everything about dedupe. It's how can you complement, how can you use other things to really go after the entire stack, leveraging everything in your data footprint reduction toolbox.
Okay, great. Let's close it out with this question. Where's the best place to protect as well as dedupe? Storage system or elsewhere?
All the above. Okay? And the reason I say that, if I put on my storage cap, I'm going to say, well, it should be the storage. If I'm going to put on my systems hat, it's like, well, we've got to look at these different capabilities. Where else is production being done? This ties back to that impact analysis, that assessment, and what can happen, what can be its impact into what. That should really then get you to that assessment of, for these things, we need to have more granularity, more flexibility. They should coexist.
All right, that looks like all the time we have for today. Thanks for the great presentation, Greg.
No worries, my pleasure.
All right, everyone stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day, Modern Backup and Recovery Strategies for Modern Disasters. Take a chance to check out those resources on your console provided by Commvault, Cohesity, Symbian Cloud, Zerto, Lacework, and Zoho. And we'll be right back.
Thanks, Annie. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our Enterprise Backup and Recovery 101 Summit, called Modern Backup and Recovery Strategies for Modern Disasters. Our speakers for the session are Dave Kawula and Emil Cabot. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry. He's a leading technology expert for both local customers and large international enterprises. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. Emil, who is a 9-time MVP since the mid-90s, specializes in enterprise data center and deployment solutions. Author of numerous books on modern technologies, he leverages his extensive experience with MSPs to guide organizations in optimal cloud adoption. Emil is actively involved in running MVP Days online, blogging on checkyourlogs.net, and presenting at conferences such as Ignite, VMon, Tech Mentor, Tech Ready, and MVP Days Community Roadshow. Dave and Emil, it's great to have you guys here. Please take it away.
Well, thank you very much for having us, David and team. It's always a great way to be able to spend the week to talk about great technologies, especially backup and recovery. And especially excited to be able to talk with my great friend, Emil. So, Emil, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Dave. How are you? And thanks, David.
I am fantastic. This topic just seems to come up with almost every single customer that we're talking with, Emil. And, you know, when we take a look at modern backup and disaster recovery strategies, you know, the landscape's really changed over the course of the last 5 years. And so, yeah, I really hope that the audience gets a lot out of the session that we put on today. As always, Emil and I love to make our sessions as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A panel, and we will get to as absolutely many as possible as we go through the course of the next hour here. And with that, Emil, let's kick this off. Okay, so our first topic that we have here is, you know, a little bit of a discussion of the evolution of backup and recovery. And probably one of the most interesting pieces for me is the resurgence of tape as a media. And I remember you were talking to me a couple weeks ago when we were in person at a webinar at a conference, and we were talking about the fact that tapes are actually making a big comeback. Are you finding that right now, that, you know, different media is actually coming back, things that we used to use in the past?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite booths to go see at the large conferences is the Iron Mountain team. And every year I go see them, they have more and more advancements in technologies, and not just the tapes that they're using, but also the processes that they've implemented inside of their organization to ensure that your data is you know, usable and retainable when you need it.
No, absolutely, Emil. And how about some of the other pieces here as well, too? So when we take a look at, you know, where we're actually storing our backups and things like that, you know, disk-based backups and arrays that we're using for backup targets are kind of becoming the new norm, as well as taking and having cloud-based and cloud tiering options as well, too. So that's one of the big pieces that we have here. And so yeah, when we take a look at that piece, you know, what are you seeing for like the cloud backups?
Well, it's you know, everybody's moving to whatever storage platform they use, be it Azure, AWS, or Google. They're integrating their platforms, their backup solutions, not just with their cloud provider, but also cross-clouding to make sure that in the event of a data center outage or a vendor outage, they still have that access to their data. Traditionally, backup has always been designed with the premise of a natural disaster, right? You know, your data center goes down because of fire, because of flood, because of evacuation, and we need access to that data now, right, as soon as possible. To keep those return point objectives and recovery point objectives low, we had to essentially build a replication center for our data so that we would have that quick time, right? That quick recovery time. And fast forward to 2017, and this becomes a perfect way for attackers to get into our data and compromise our backup data. When one of these environments goes down, the biggest thing that we go to is our backups to restore everything. And so, what we started noticing quickly happening was when these attackers get into our environments, they go attack our backups first and make sure that they have that data compromised before they even launch the attack.
Oh, absolutely. And so would it be safe to say, Emil, that our first little gold nugget for everyone attending here is that your backup and DR infrastructure, in our humble opinion, is more production than production today? Because when it comes time to have to restore and bring your data back from whatever medium it is that you stored it on, you best make sure that that's available for you and make sure that it's going to be able to come back in a expedited manner. All right, so Emil, we actually have our first question come in here, and so I'll let you take this one. What are some common challenges organizations face when managing recovery efforts, and what are the most common pitfalls to avoid?
When managing the recovery effort, one of the things that we're going to run into, especially in the case when we have the attacker that's gotten to our backups first, is ensuring that our retention policy exceeds our breach time, right? So if they've been in here for 6 months, we need to be able to restore our full production environment back to 7 months ago. One of the biggest problems that we see these days with organizations that have a proper backup strategy in place is that the attackers have been there long enough to wait out their replication times and their recoveries or their retention schedules, right? So unfortunately, when we start talking about 321 rules and 32110 rules and immutable storage, all of these things start to generate an immense level of cost. And until an organization has to go through one of these recoveries, it's very, very hard to get the appropriate level of budget allocated to what we need for backup, right? So going back to your earlier point, Dave, about your backup being more production than production, unfortunately, that also comes to the case of budget.
No, absolutely, Emil, absolutely. And so when we take a look at kind of moving on to our next topic here, the traditional landscape of backups, DR, and recovery, when we take a look at this, normally what we would look as DR and backup administrators is we would look at the, traditional pieces of recovery. I want a big red button. You go to Staples, you buy a big red button, your easy button, and I want to press that, and I want to be able to fail over to the other data center or the other set of infrastructure in the event that we have to take and we have something going on. And it comes in the form of natural disasters, fire, flood, earthquake, tornado, depending on where it is you live. Maybe it's snowstorm, maybe it's flooding nowadays. And so that's one piece. Second piece is tech failures. You've got planned PDU outage or planned power outage for, one of your data centers or server rooms. We want to be able to fail over. One of the big pieces that we have to look at inside of here, though, is that there's a new player inside of here, and that's the threat actors. And so when they take a look at coming after, as you mentioned, your backup infrastructure, that infrastructure that's more production than production, we almost need to have a secondary playbook that's built with this. So we need a playbook for, traditional DR, and then now we need a secondary playbook that we go with for cyber threats. And so that can be in the form of an incident response plan, that can be in the form of a secondary DR plan, but the way that we recover when we're under attack is way different than traditional recoveries. So what do you think about that piece, Emil?
The biggest thing is to not just plan for this, but prepare for this. We heard someone last year that their organization got hit by a full ransomware attack, And because they went through regular drills, regular practices of what to do when one of these incidents happen, they were able to not just only hit the ground running, but do so with a clear head. When we're coming into one of these recovery scenarios, whether the attacker is still present in the environment or not, it's a lot of stress from a lot of different places as we're trying to technically get everything back to working together again. Right. So it's extremely important to not only plan for this, but also go through the drill, act it out. One of the biggest tips that I'm going to give everybody is make sure that we have somebody assigned to be gatekeeper at the door. And I've been in some of these where we literally have the person move their desk in front of the door to the IT room, because the last thing that we want to have is people walking up to us and asking how the recovery is going when we're knee deep in code.
No, absolutely. That gatekeeper's huge as part of this process as well. And we were lucky enough to be at a security conference. We were chatting about like the average dwell times that are out there for the bad guys by the time they're actually going to take and get in, especially when you look at cyber attacks and having to recover from that. And that number is 180 days. And one of the reasons for that is the bad guys are getting so efficient and so organized when they're taking and they're coming through their attacks, is that they're actually going through credential brokers to gain access, and that takes time. And, it takes them a little while to take and to get in. And so when we take a look at, what's actually going on with this, that's huge for us. And so one of the next little gold nuggets for everybody is when we're backing up our infrastructure, one of the pieces that we have to look at of backing up is also those log files, because if we know that the typical log storage duration for most of our organizations is 180 days, Emil, those threat actors will sometimes live in the infrastructure for longer than 180 days, because now they're kind of covering up their trails of their access points getting into our networks as well. So very interesting. So make sure that you're also keeping historical backups of all your logs as well, because if you do have an attack, you're going to need that. All right. So the next thing is and this is a really interesting one for me, because never have I had the opportunity to get more budget for backup in DR than when you're immediately under an attack. And so this is one of those areas where it's like, well, we'd like to spend the money on our backup infrastructure, on our DR infrastructure, but it's really not in the cards this year. Maybe next year we'll have a little bigger budget, or can't you just rehab that old gear that you've got and we'll use that for backup in DR? Well, the reality of it is that you have to take a look at not having access to any of your infrastructure and what this looks like from a downtime perspective to your organization and what type of financial impact this is going to cause. Because of the fact that, we might be talking about, fines from upstream business partners of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars an hour if you're in the manufacturing sector, for example. And so I got asked the question, Emil, how do you quantify the impact on downtime for the organization if you don't really know or understand? Because if you go around to the business, Emil, and you say, well, can you survive with your server being down or without access to your ERP system? And they come back and say, oh yeah, no problem. Perfect. Let's go through an exercise. Turn off some of those workloads, and you'll find out real quick as to how long somebody can last without that. Do we even have processes to go back to pen and paper? And this is huge. This is absolutely huge for organizations. So, Emil, what are your thoughts on like downtime and the impact of this, and what organizations can do to prepare for that? Like the story you had about, the organization that had actually prepared and gone through the fire drill exercise and were well prepared when the event happened.
Exchange has been the cornerstone of organizational communications for more than 20 years now. And the global address list is our calendar. It's our contact list, right? All of our organizational emails, our distribution lists, our groups, all the contact info is in there. When your email gets compromised, your global address list is gone. It's amazing how many people inside of the organization don't know how to contact their boss, their subordinate, or their service desk without having access to that gal, right? So you mentioned pen and paper. That's a huge, huge value add, right? The attacker is not going to be able to compromise that piece of paper. So contact lists and these escalation procedures when outages go down are absolutely crucial. You really don't know what's going to happen and how much you rely on this data until you don't have access to any of it. And losing all of it in itself, it's like having your house burned down, right? You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You don't know who to talk to. So again, right? Talk to somebody. At this stage in the game, it's 2024. If everyone on this call hasn't gone through a breach, I can guarantee you likely know somebody who has. Don't necessarily take it from the news. Take it from people you know, right? Find out what these recoveries actually take, right? If your organization, if your backup is gone and you have to completely rebuild your organization without backup of without any technical data at all, would you be able to do it?
Well, and it's a funny story. I like to tell stories, and so the story that I'll tell here is that an organization, and it wasn't actually even a cyber threat. They had an issue with a building power outage where I think there was a power cable that was cut in the streets, and their entire building that they were in was down for I think a period of 2-3 weeks by the time they actually figured this out and got things back up and running. And that contact list that you're talking about was stored on an on-prem SharePoint server. Well, when the power and the generators ran out of diesel and everything else and everything went offline, guess what? You don't have access to that anymore. So print this stuff out, keep a pen and paper copy with this as well. All right. So when we take a look at the kind of modern backup strategies, we've really set the stage here, for having two different types of, plans. So you've got cyber threats, and then you've got traditional kind of fire and flood, and the other kind of areas that you would have with normal DR and having to recover. One of the big pieces that I look at now is the modern backup solutions have to have the ability to take and be recoverable. Because once again, I'll go back to my point, DR and backups is more production than productions. So having this little thing called immutability, I know we coined this as a new phrase, but immutability has been around since, as long as I've been working with PCs, and, we used to have immutability on our floppy disks.
That little plastic switch.
You'd click the little tab and you'd make it so that it's read only. I'm like, it's no different than when we look at this term of immutability. We're just doing it at a software level, right? And so we're using software with the storage and backup targets or cloud providers to provide this layer of immutability. Write once, read many, worm solutions. We're going back, right? You'd have a tape. Oh, this tape is critical. We want to make sure that we can never overwrite this tape. It wasn't for threat actors or, bad guys trying to take this from us. It was for the fact that we just needed to make sure that we maintained that data. So we'd pop the tab on the tapes in a point in time, and, that would become read-only. Well, that's your immutability for you. And so immutable backups are huge because, like, as Emil mentioned, what immutability protects us from is it protects us from the bad guys going through and trying to wipe those backups. The second piece of this is the automation in behind here. One of the things we want to do is we want to scan our backups and our data that's stored inside of those backups, looking for patterns of potential malware, ransomware, other things that are happening inside of there, and now being able to report on that. And also doing scans inside of there, malware scans of your backups to make sure that they're clean. Because, Emil, I know you've got a story for me on this one. what happens when you take and you nicely clean up an environment and all of a sudden somebody brings back an infected laptop? So I know you have a story about that one for us, and that one's pretty interesting for me.
Yeah, these guys were using a local hosting provider to manage their backups off-site. And someone that worked at the hosting provider was browsing the internet with enterprise credentials, and it got compromised. The attackers got into the hosting backup provider and looked at all the clients. They found the client with the highest revenue. They researched the company. They found out when their busiest day of the year was. This was a construction company, and where they were located, all bids for contracting jobs for the year are submitted on April 1st. So these guys got fully encrypted at March 31st, took down their entire environment. The attack had come in through their backups, so all their backups were gone. Basically, what they did was once they got into the backup providers, they were then able to get into the virtual machine backups, and they copied the domain controller VM out. From there, they were able to get into the NTDS database and get enterprise credentials. So that's how the breach happened. Unfortunately, from the client's perspective, they did nothing wrong, and it still cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. We had a sales guy that decided to not share his sales information with the rest of the team because he wanted to appear to be a whale, and had all of his projects saved on his machine that he did not submit to be reimaged. So as we were going through the recovery, he came and snuck the laptop back into the environment to get his sales orders in and re-encrypted everybody again. So it's an extremely valuable point when you're going through one of these recoveries to get to the physical level. We had stickers on every machine that we had to reimage. These days, it often doesn't go that deep because attackers don't need to. They're going to get into your data. Dave mentioned earlier that, the typical lead time is 180 days. That's not necessarily because they're in poking around for 180 days. Once someone is able to compromise your network and they've successfully done that, they're going to sell that access to a party that actually does want your data. So then they will buy that connection and use it to come into your network, take whatever they need, and then depending upon your organization, they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to encrypt all your data and hold it ransom. They're going to upload their data to upload your data to their servers, and then they won't encrypt anything. They'll just let you know that, hey, we've got everything that you own. We'll submit all your intellectual property out to the world if you don't give us money, right? And usually that's the way that we see them going down these days.
Yeah, that leads into a really important point that you're looking at on the slide right now. It's the 3-2-1 rule, and that's actually extended out now over the years into a 3-2-1-0-0 plus rule. And the rule for you with your backups, and this is another little tip for everyone, is that you never want to have just one copy of your backup data. You want to always make sure you got at least a minimum of 3 or more copies of your backup data on 2 different types of media and potentially in different locations. So either cloud, another data center, different racks. So you're protecting against basically a single building failure or whatnot, taking out all your infrastructure. Now, in this situation, when those threat actors get in, we want to make sure that we have an immutable backup as well. And that immutable backup that we have is one where we can, those backups, the threat actors get in, we have what I call a measure of recoverability. And what I mean by the measure of recoverability is, how long and, what data are you going to want to be able to get back in the event that you are compromised? And Emil mentioned something very important at the beginning of this presentation, and that was the point that if you haven't been breached yet, you're going to be breached. So we don't look at it anymore saying, okay, we're going to do everything possible to make sure that we never get breached. That's pretty impossible to say in today's landscape that we've got. And so now it's, you have to assume breach. And so with the assume breach mentality, we want to make sure that our critical assets like our backups and DR infrastructure are covered. And so just digging into this a little bit, we're actually finding now, Emil, that the insurance companies, the brokers, are asking these types of questions. Like, for example, on the questionnaire, and you can put up a virtual show of hands on the webinar. I know I can't see everybody, but if you've gone through a cyber insurance review and renewal process, they ask these questions now on your forms, and they're like, what do your backups look like? Do you have multiple copies of your backup, and is one of those copies immutable? And so you have to be able to attest to those pieces now. One of the things, Emil, that I find organizations struggle with a little bit is having a level of understanding of, recovery point objectives, and also looking at, CDP solutions that are out there as well. Like, for example, when we take a look at having highly available SQL servers, well, what's one of the methods that we keep a SQL server highly available? Well, we make sure that we've got copies of those log files, and those log files are taking and getting transmitted between the nodes in the SQL databases to making sure that we've got that data highly available. So if we have to fail over from one side to another, we can do that. In exchange, we have what are called availability groups, and I guess it's the same in SQL servers now too. And so those availability groups, same thing. We do log skipping. We make sure that we've got that data highly available and resilient between multiple nodes. And so when we look at, backup and protecting our critical data, these are some very serious questions that you've got to take and ask when you're architecting your solution. How many recovery points do you need, and how frequently do they need to happen? So does your business expect that, you're going to have 5 minutes of potential data loss in the event that you've got to recover? 5 hours? 5 days? 5 weeks? What's an acceptable amount of data loss for them? And then you have to build that into a budget, because, the lower you take that increment down, the lower you're going to be taking down your infrastructure as well. So anyways, Emil, what are your thoughts on kind of recovery points?
And well, not just recovery point. Well, you hit everything with recovery points. So but when you're looking at recovery point objective, you also have to consider your recovery time objective, what that RTO is. How long is it going to take your organization from once you start the restoration process to be able to be working in your recovered environment? A lot of organizations that I work with, once they initiate that and we're ready to go, that RTO is more important than the RPO. Right. Whoa.
Still there, Emil?
Yeah. So you have to ensure that your infrastructure is able to maintain those backups. A lot of backup providers, or at least a couple of the main ones, have a solution where you can light up your recovery virtual environment directly from your backup media. So in order to do that, you need to have compute and memory resources in your backup infrastructure as well. So if you need that very short RTO, RPO, then not only do you need continuous data protection on that data, but you also need available resources or standby resources sitting there to hold that when you light them back up.
Perfect. And Emil, I've actually got another question. This one here actually came from the conference that we were lucky enough to attend together a few weeks back. And this one was surrounding what's the best way to talk to a business and management to have them understand the importance of spending money on your backup and DR infrastructure, because I guess this organization had really struggled in the past with taking and getting the appropriate amount of budget for the proper tools and everything else that were required. So when you're talking to the business about the importance of backups, DR, protecting its threat actors, what's your approach for this now?
I guess you need to emphasize the criticality of what your technical infrastructure provides to the organization. Us in IT, we work in a cost center, and the vast majority of us never make the organization money. So we're always asking for money. It's really, really difficult to articulate the gravity of this kind of an outage to an executive without them being able to personally relate to that. I mean, the last thing we want to do is go and pull our external connection and just see what happens, right? So, barring an outage and again, looking through, like I've seen budget approved because somebody's golf buddy got hit, right? So it's having to take that down to a personal sense. And the analogy that our corporate infrastructure now is no better or worse than the security on our house. If somebody wants to get in, they just need to grab a rock and break the window and come through, right? We're going to do everything we can to ensure that that doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, we do need to have that plan in place. And it's ultimately the organization's prerogative on whether they go for it or not. Now, what I find a lot with, especially trying to get executives to implement some of these new security controls, is they simply don't want to do it. And that's fine. I mean, I can't tell the executive what to do, but what I will do is make them sign something that says that, the vulnerability that they're creating in the organization has the potential to impact the entire company. And you're now accepting risk for introducing this vulnerability into the organization. And once that's gone through legal, they don't sign it. And now we have budget.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so just kind of further to that point, and one of the things that I've done as well inside of organizations is everybody in the organizations understands the concept of insurance. Okay, so we get insurance for our general liability. So if somebody slips and falls as they're entering our facility, we buy insurance for that. So, we'll cover their medical bills and, we'll be okay as an organization. We buy cyber insurance now as well, too. And kind of a side part of that is I look at backup and DR almost as like internal insurance that we're buying so that we can take and we can get ourselves back online. So it's like, well, how much do you want that premium to be, and how much coverage do we want? And so you provide the different options and find a different way that we can kind of speak to these pieces. So yeah, great answer. Thank you very much.
And for everybody on the call, check your cyber insurance policy. When these first came out a few years ago, it was a very, very blanket policy that just says, yeah, we'll cover you in the event of a cyber attack. These days, that can be a few pages to a book worth of stipulations, and a lot of the requirements inside these cybersecurity policies not only limit the insurance provider's risk, but also outline the requirements that your organization must take to even be applicable for the policy. So you need to check that and make sure that your organizational updating policies specifically align with what that cybersecurity policy says.
Yeah, absolutely, Emil. All right, our next topic here is automation. And for me, automation is around one very big thing. Emil, I love to script things with PowerShell. And, if I have to click something 5 times, I'm wanting to automate that process because it's something that I feel that, you shouldn't have to just keep repetitively doing something over and over again if there are ways of automating. So this is a question you have to ask with your modern backup and DR strategies. Are you going to be manual, or are you going to be automatic, or are you going to be some type of a hybrid in the terms of recovery? Because it's not always as simple as just pressing that big red button and recovering that particular workload. Sometimes that's a custom application that's been homegrown, that's been written by developers that you've hired. Maybe the lead developers are still around, maybe they're not. And normally when we take and even go through a reboot process of some of these application servers, there's things that we need to do to make sure that services are coming online, that, the application's loading properly, that we're connecting to the databases properly. There's checks and balances that we have to go through inside of here when we go through our recovery efforts. And it's one of those things that it's just kind of outside of the purview of the backup vendors, and it's something that we have to do as IT pros, where we have to take and make sure that, the services that we're providing back to the business do come back online, regardless if it's a reboot exercise for patching, regardless if it's a restore operation because we have to bring something back for a variety of reasons. And so, just you have to make that decision as an organization as to how far you want to take this. I've seen organizations have complete playbooks surrounding this where, even patching and orchestrating that is very complex. I have others that want to just go completely manual because, they're not far enough along or they don't have the in-house expertise in order to take and script some of these pieces. So, Emil, where can you kind of find a fine balance for this in regards to recovery and automating this process, not just the backups, but I'm talking about when the day comes when we have to restore. So I always put on my hat of like the cyber recovery where, oh my gosh, everything's gone. We need to restore everything. Where do you start with that? Like, where does an organization pick that up and say, okay, well, how do I even classify which VMs need to come online first and things like that?
Yeah, it's your most critical services. For some reason, every time I have to deal with a ransomware recovery or a cyber attack recovery, it's the day before payroll. And one of the greatest ways to get your IT team to stop helping them is to not pay them. So accounting is absolutely always at the forefront of what I restore. Your domain controllers is probably the closest first to that, right? Your domain controllers is your identity. And without them, none of your systems are going to work. So we need to get that up. And then from there, it really depends on the organization, right? Most of my clients, especially in the oil and gas world, the biggest things they need to get back up are their SQL databases and their design systems.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And we mentioned immutability a little bit here as well, too. So kind of our next topic that we're moving into. What are some different types of immutability that organizations can get into? Is it something where you've got to buy a custom appliance for? Can we do this at a software level? I know I've actually had clients move back to getting tapes now. And just in regards to the tapes, there's services out there, for example, and I don't like to really mention vendors on the websites, but Iron Mountain is a big storage facility. And they actually take care of some of the tapes, don't they? Because tapes have kind of a limited shelf life. So if you have tape as your medium, you kind of have to look after that. So what are some of the things that vendors like Iron Mountain are doing to help organizations make sure that their tapes kind of remain viable for them in the event that they have to bring data back over a long period of time?
Yeah, so when you store these disks, and immutable is a very, very perfect scenario for this because immutable disks by design, you write once to them and never touch them again. One of the main reasons why everybody got off of tapes as their main level of backup storage is because these tapes degrade, and over time, you're not going to be able to recover that data. What these guys do in the tape storage facilities is when the tape gets put in through the serial number and the manufacture date and the date backed up, they monitor everything. And essentially when whatever tape you're using, let's say that tape has an estimated 20-year lifespan, then what they do is after 10 years, they will go and duplicate that tape onto new hardware and then store it back. So every 10 years or halfway before the tape lifespan ends, as a part of the managed service, they're just updating that for you. And then when they do that copy, of course, they're validating at a bit level whether the backup copy is intact or not.
Yeah, I find it very ironic that we had a big push to get away from tape for all of these years, and now we're kind of right back to that, where it's like, oh, maybe that actually is a good medium that we can go to. Now, remember, there's other immutability options that you have, and if scalability is an issue for you, your favorite cloud providers do offer you blob-based storage that's going to take and allow immutability features. And so at a software level, what you're typically doing is you're saying, okay, how many days or how many of those recovery points do you want to have as immutable? Is it the first 10? Is it the first 30? They're configurable settings inside of there. So basically what it means is that, you're not going to be able to change that data. And there will be an increased cost in, your cloud-based storage. And there's a profound growth in cloud-based storage for this exact reason. But you can also build your own appliances, or you can buy appliances that are kind of have immutability options built in. All right, perfect lead-in for cloud-based backup. So this one here is interesting because I believe personally, Emil, that one size doesn't fit all. I think that most organizations and individuals on this call, maybe you're 100% cloud. Okay, great. Okay, well, we'll have some cloud-based backup solutions natively in your cloud provider. It's probably going to be able to help you with some of that infrastructure, or some third-party providers that can add some additional features that you're needing. Maybe you're all on-prem, and so that's great. So, we'll have the traditional backup methods, the tapes and storage, disk-based storage, and things like that to back that up. But I believe the hybrid solution here is really key. We're taking and we're having either cross clouds. So if you're in one cloud provider, maybe you want to be backing up to another cloud provider of your choice, just in case your tenant gets compromised or something like that. And from a hybrid perspective, I want to try to make sure that we're pushing some copies of our data, the most critical backups that we have, up to our cloud provider in either secured vaults or wherever it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, one of the challenges that you're going to have from a recoverability perspective, especially when cyber insurance gets involved, is you could be potentially hands-off your infrastructure when it comes time to recovering, because they're going to want to do the forensic analysis coming in to see exactly where the breach came from. And that's going to take time. And you may not be able to just press the big red button and recover. But guess what? If you did have cloud-based backups, maybe you can spin up some greenfield infrastructure in the favorite cloud of your choice. And maybe that's the way that you go through this recovery process. And along those lines, one of the things that we do recommend is that if you are one of those all on-prem or hybrid shops, make sure that you've got some spare gear hanging out, because if all of your infrastructure is compromised and you have to recover, where are you recovering to? Are you recovering to the same environment that was just compromised? Because it's probably just going to get re-compromised again until you get the bad guys all the way out. So when you're recovering, sometimes you have to look at a completely greenfield hypervisors or hyper-converged infrastructure that you're actually bringing that data back to. And that's a really important piece when we take a look at this. Emil, any thoughts on cloud, hybrid, and these types of backups?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what size your organization is or how smart you are. I can guarantee you at the end of the day, Microsoft, Google, Amazon are going to build a more secure, more highly available data center than we will. When it comes to our backup data, leveraging those data centers is a huge value add, right? We can take one of these copies now, put it to our geolocated data center, and then from there have it geo-redundantly copied to your provider's data centers across the country or across the globe. Nobody can do that, right? Without incredible amounts of infrastructure in place. The beauty about a lot of these cloud solutions is you don't pay for running compute nodes. You're only paying for the storage. So when it comes to being able to light this stuff back up, you get a huge bump, not only in cost savings, but also in initial deployment costs. And I think I just walked right into your next slide.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that beautiful lead-in, Emil. We actually had a question that just came up from Bernie. Bernie, thank you very much for your question. And this one's so important. And it's, how many people do you recommend have access to your backup data? And so I'll take the first piece of this, and then Emil, you can go next, okay? And so Bernie, when I look at this, I often ask the same question, and I say, how many domain administrators do you need inside of your infrastructure? Does everybody need to be a domain admin? No. Probably if you have more than 5, you need to be evaluating your infrastructure, because, you know, we don't want to be giving the keys to the kingdom. It's kind of like the same idea cloud-wise. How many global admins do you need? Well, you know, we want to make sure, Bernie, that we're using proper ways to gain access to this. And I'll go back to the thing I said at the very beginning of the webinar was DR and backup data and that infrastructure that supports it is more production than production. So to answer that very succinctly, very few, all right? And those that do access it need to have the most strictive controls in place, because that is really one of the only ways that you're going to be able to recover in the event of a cyber threat is that backup data. So it really is the holy grail. So Emil, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have a client with 150,000 endpoints. They have 2 or 3, I can't remember. So again, it's you want the person that manages your backup, you want a backup for that person, and that's probably it. At most, another person for oversight. But not only are we ensuring and protecting our intellectual property inside of this data, but also we have to, you know, make sure that these accounts aren't ones that are going to get breached, right? So we're only going to limit very, very few people to having access to the data. And those accounts are usually, and always, actually not usually, always now going to be accessed from privileged access workstations.
Yeah, absolutely. One piece I'll add on the hybrid backup strategies, because we did talk about this a little bit. And this one here is test, test, test. If you have hybrid backup strategies, and one of your recoveries that you listed is the ability to recover to the cloud, please make sure that you're actually testing that works properly. Because if your backups have some type of reliance on your on-prem infrastructure, better make sure that you've got your networks pinned up properly, your VPNs, your internets, all of those pieces looked after. Just storing it up in the cloud and saying we can recover is going to be a monumental work effort to getting all of that pinned up, especially when you're in an emergency. All right, so the next one that I've got here, actually we've got another question that came in, Emil, I'll let you take this one here. Are there any mechanisms for capturing feedback, conducting post-incident reviews, and updating recovery plans based on identified areas for improvement?
I guess the modern way to do that is through digital experience and something called user sentiment. There are a couple of solutions out there today that are agent-based that basically allow you to dynamically query your user environment to get feedback on that. Outside of having a DEX tool like that, when it comes to a breach and a recovery, people are probably the most sympathetic towards IT than they ever will be in your career. So it's a very, very good time to have one of those town halls or a series of departmental meetings and do face-to-face with the team. You'll probably get the best feedback and the most constructive feedback once operations have settled down, but before everybody's forgotten how much trouble it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we take a look at this. What if your team doesn't have the cycles to take and look after all of these modern DR solutions that are out there and making sure that all these pieces are buttoned up? Are you going to get a managed service provider that's going to provide a disaster recovery as a service platform for you? Hey, I'm all for it, because at the end of the day, one of the things that we have to look at is the protection for the organization. If we can't inherently provide the level and measure of protection required to adequately protect the organization, hey, outsourcing sometimes makes a lot of sense. The big thing here is just make sure that you're actually vetting those vendors, because that little story that Emil had was a disaster recovery as a service, managed service provider, and they weren't following the strictest of controls. So maybe your organization has to follow NIST and HIPAA, and maybe you're working down, the Center for Internet Security baselines, and you're locking down your environments. Make sure your providers are too. All right. Next question that we've got is in automation, isn't AI providing new functionality? And how do we see AI future? Or how do you see AI, which can be used by the bad guys, as affecting enterprise backup disaster recovery? Is it making it better or worse? So Emil, you're kind of an AI person in this space a lot. What do you think about that?
Well, better or worse is a double-edged sword, because as they're going to advance as fast or faster than us, and we have to either react or recover. So it is what it is, right? The biggest problem that anybody is going to face right now is if they don't investigate AI and figure out how to utilize it in their solutions. So all of the major backup providers are absolutely integrating AI into their engines today. And it goes back to what Dave mentioned earlier about the automation, right? There's two major things that these AI bots are doing. One is going through your backups to scan the data for malicious content. The other one is providing full validation of those backups. So for example, if you have an Exchange server, then it will go through and not only ensure that the backup completed successfully, but that if the Exchange server was restored, it would still function. Good question.
All right. I got time for a couple more questions here. The next question, Emil, is how do I build a DR for SQL clusters? Do I go active, passive, or active, active? Well, I think the architecture that you're going to have for your SQL clusters going to depend kind of on your organizational needs. And I hate to throw out the consulting answer that it depends, but it does kind of depend on, what it is that you're trying to provide availability for. You have to, first of all, make sure that your applications can support active, active inside of that SQL cluster. I see a lot of organizations going active, passive, and then potentially backing up off the passive node to not impact the performance of the production node. A lot of different options here. Other options is that, maybe one of those passive nodes, maybe that's going to be cloud-based as well. Lots of different choices. I think pretty much every backup vendor that I've worked with, modern backup vendor, supports the ability to have SQL backup support. So that's really kind of a non-issue inside of there. So I don't really see a major issue there.
The availability groups in SQL are a nice way to get failover without having to do too much work in architecture. Really, the only thing to keep note of when you're using availability groups inside of SQL is failover will work great, but failback has to be manual. So in the event that your primary SQL server goes offline, it fails over to your secondary is going to stay live until you manually fail it back. So essentially, that can't handle a double failure.
All right. Well, Emil, we're almost at our time, but I've got one little kind of gold nugget for everyone here. And so when we're in a breach or something's happening, we're often asked that we have to rebuild our infrastructure, right, Emil? And so one of the things that we do a great job of right now is backing up our virtualized infrastructure, be it on VMware, be it on Microsoft Hyper-V, be it on platform of your choice. One of the things I really want you to strongly consider is that your physical server infrastructure, a lot of organizations still have that out there. Make sure that you're backing up your physical servers as well. Even if you're not taking the full data drive, if it is a hypervisor, having the OS drive and having the ability to recover that out of bare metal nature is really key for us. And with that, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Our time has come. David and team, thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to do these, and thank you very much.
Okay, guys, great job, but great presentation and answering all those questions.